Haha, Xenosaga Trilogy versus Xenoblade Trilogy will be an interesting versus. Xenoblade will win because there are more players that play Xenoblade games. Those games sold millions, whereas not a single Xenosaga game sold millions. Maybe just the first one surpassed the 1 million units sold, and nobody played the second game, nobody played the third game. Last week we didn't do a versus episode on this, but I did kind of like a really short breakdown that I'll upload on my second channel in a clip. That was like the Xenosaga Trilogy and the Shadow Hearts Trilogy. And in there I said the same thing, that the Xenosaga is just, everybody knows Xenosaga because of the first game. But not a lot of people play the second game, and no one played the third game. So Xenoblade will win by a landslide. Now, if you're asking me personally, actually I think I prefer, well, I think Xenosaga 3 beats every single one of them. Every Xenosaga game. I think Xenosaga 3 is the best Xeno game of all time, but there's also Xenogears and Xenoblade Chronicles 3, right? But yeah, as a trilogy, I think Xenoblade Chronicles is the better trilogy. Because, you know, the first Xenosaga game is great and I love it, but it's just not that special to me personally. I know it's a big deal to a lot of people, but not to me. To me, Xenosaga 3 is far more special. Xenosaga 2 is a troublesome mess. I still love it, but it's a damn mess. And then you got Xenoblade Chronicles. The first one is excellent. The second one, well, it's like Xenosaga 2, right? It's kind of troublesome, but it's more enjoyable than Xenosaga 2. And 3 is a masterpiece, just like Xenosaga 3. So, there you go. I still think Xenoblade is a bit better. Xenosaga should be better, but it isn't. It just isn't. Nobody playing the third Xenosaga is a Greek tragedy. It is, but that's because barely any copies were printed. I think Namco only printed like 300,000 copies, I don't know. I made a video called 10 Things You Didn't Know About the Xenosaga Trilogy many years ago, and I covered that. But the point is that it's a game that barely sold, and they printed very few copies, just like Enix did with Valkyrie Profile or Konami with Suikoden 2. Not many copies are out there, which is the reason why the game is so rare and expensive nowadays. I think it's one of the rarest PS2 JRPGs nowadays, because some JRPGs on the PS2 that used to be rare, they still kind of are, but nowadays they're not as expensive as they were a couple of years ago during the pandemic. But Xenosaga 3 retained its price. It's insane. Yeah, so that's the reason why a lot of people didn't play it, but, you know, it's a PS2 game. A lot of people can emulate it with a decent computer, more decent than mine. For some reason, I can't emulate PS2 games here. And, yeah, anybody can play it nowadays. But no, people want to pay money for it. Even though they can play it for free, they want to pay money for it. But Namco doesn't want your money. Do you think modern games tend to have a lot of fetch quests and tend to be more monotonous than older games? Absolutely. I think we just talked about that in the last Q&A. And I think I remember a video recently where I talked about that. Probably in the... Yeah, I made a video on Monday called 10 JRPGs that should have been longer. And one of the games in that video was Grand Blue Fantasy Relink. And I criticized that. Like 70% of the game is just optional content, side quests, and most of them are just... not exactly fetch quests, but they're like, you know, kill that monster, kill the same monster. Oh, now you're done? Oh, kill the same monster in a higher difficulty. Or you're done? Kill the same monster in an even higher difficulty. Come on, I quit the game, you know. I made it far in the post game in Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, and I made it to the point where every single quest was in nightmare mode. And I beat some of them, but I just couldn't take it anymore. I was like, man, I'm just doing the same and the same and the same again. I gave up, you know. So yeah, I think a lot of modern games, they add a crap ton of stupid, monotonous, useless, uninteresting fetch quests just to increase the length of the game. Because there's this obsession, no offense to anybody, even though every time I talk about this I offend a lot of people. If you get offended, then I don't give a shit. But I think there's a big obsession nowadays with completionism and trophies and 100% in the games. I know a lot of you are passionate about that, but that's what... I mean, it's happening because of you. We get a lot of ridiculous side quests because of this, because developers see that a lot of you are into that, and they want to increase the gains as much as they can. And what do? Cheap difficulty spikes, monotonous grinding, useless grinding, and a crap ton of fetch quests that are like ridiculously boring, pathetic, and uninteresting, you know. Yeah, well, if you like that, if you still like that, then good for you. This nowadays market is developed precisely to you. You are the target audience. You completionist. What makes a combat system feel technical to me? Well, there are a lot of battle mechanics in JRPGs where you can win with a little bit of strategy and with a little bit of knowledge, but at the end of the day, you're just mashing buttons. In an action RPG, they're fast-paced. You gotta be, there's the least required level of skill to win most battles. There will always be a couple of bosses, that will give you trouble and you're gonna have to grind. But most people, instead of relying on technique or skill, they're just gonna grind. Or they're gonna play the game on normal or easy, right? To beat the battle, to overcome the challenge. The same in a turn-based RPG. Not so much in strategy RPGs. I think the large majority of strategy RPGs, not all of them are kind of technical. Because you can't just win by clicking buttons, You gotta be strategic, you gotta be more technical, you gotta think what you're gonna do, how you're going to approach this situation or this battle or this enemy or this boss, So, in my opinion, most strategy RPGs are very technical games. Even the ones that are seem like simple, but there are others that are like, they don't have a lot of penalties, they don't have a lot of complexity to them, like Onimusha Tactics, for example. It's kind of inspired a bit by Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics, but it's nowhere near as complex as those games. Those games are technical, but Onimusha Tactics is a simplified version of that. Have you ever played the Mercenary Saga, for example? Most of those games, or some of the Kemco strategy RPGs, are like kind of on the easy side of things, easy to understand. They do get more challenging in later stages, but it's like there's nothing convoluted in there, no complexity to them, no depth. That doesn't make them bad, though. They're still good and interesting. But I think what makes a combat technical, it's not only the difficulty or the challenge to it, but also the complexity. Like, okay, you can attack enemies with a sword, but with a sword, if you're using a sword, you can attack them from behind. Or if you're using a lance, you can attack them from the right. Or you can attack them from like 2 squares away, but from a higher, I don't know, something like that. The more details they add to the battle mechanics to make them more complex and more difficult, challenging, the more technical they become. I think that's what I mean by when I say something like the battle system is very technical here. You probably see me saying that with some games. It's that, But when it comes to action RPGs, it's a bit different. Action RPGs don't tend to be complicated. They're just, use buttons to attack and that's it. But there are a lot of action RPGs like the Souls games, for example, where you can't just button mash your controller and dodge and defend and win, No. There's more complexity to them that you gotta guard, pay attention to the enemy's movements, to their patterns, attack from a distance, or, there's a lot of strategy involved in there. So that's where the technicalities come into play. That's the best explanation I can give you of what makes a JRPG battle system technical. Great question, man. Thanks for asking. What is your opinion on the difficulty spikes in JRPGs? Do you enjoy them or just find them annoying? There's a video that I did called 5 things I hate in JRPGs. Check it out if you can. I don't have a very good opinion on difficulty spikes. I've never understood them. I like difficulty progression in video games. Like they start getting more challenging as you advance. But then, when they're like this, okay, it's easy, but then, ooh, difficulty spike, but then it's easy again. Oh, I've been even bigger difficulties, and I don't like that. Probably because I have OCD, I don't know. Maybe. Couldn't tell you. But it's just not... It's not fun. What do you think about optional bosses that are harder than the final bosses? That's okay, they're there precisely designed for people who want a good challenge. They want to challenge themselves. That's why they're optional, Those difficulty spikes in every single JRPG should be optional. Here's this secret boss, and it's hard as hell, much harder than the final boss, but it's optional, it's just there if you want to fight it. I'm just saying it's there, it's awesome, it's epic, and you're gonna have a blast, you know, but no, it's optional, it's just there. And we go and fight them anyway, right? Because we can't resist. I don't do this in most JRPGs, but I've done it in some. Octopath Traveler 1 and 2 were good examples. I was like, man, I know it's optional, and it's gonna be a pain in the ass, but there I was. But yeah, I think it's a good idea to include bosses like that. Secret, optional, super powerful bosses should be a thing in most JRPGs. They kinda are in a lot of JRPGs actually, even modern ones. You know, but I respect that, I like that, and I believe it should continue. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of optional bosses, you know, I've still fought against some of them. Like the ones in Chrono Cross, who were a blast. I don't know, I like the idea. Not the biggest fan, but you know, I think it should be there. Tales of Xillia Remaster leaked thoughts. Are you buying it? We talked about this in previous Q&As, but I don't think the remasters are real because I just don't trust Bandai Namco, and why would they remaster those games? You know, they have a lot more to remaster, but if that rumor turns out to be true, then that's freaking amazing, but again, I don't trust Namco because they messed up Symphonia and it wasn't a good remaster and people were upset, people were angry, and maybe they'll look into that and they'll admit their mistakes and say, oh, okay, so we need to do better for Xillia 1 and 2, right? Hopefully they'll do that, but I just don't trust Namco anymore. You know, they have lost a bit of my respect for when it comes to that, because in my opinion they should remaster or remake the games that never came out of Japan, and instead of doing that they're focusing on remastering, bringing back games that got a bunch of versions. Yes, Xillia 1 and 2 are exclusive to the PlayStation 3, but they're there. You know, why not release Rebirth? Or Tales of Fantasia, the only version we got is the shitty Game Boy Advance port. I don't know. Without getting into that, you know, I think the Tales of Xillia being remastered, even if it ends up being a shitty remaster, I guess it's gonna be good, because number one, people will care about the games nowadays more. People will probably care about the video I did on Xillia 1 and 2 several weeks ago, so that benefits me. And number three, people will be able to play them. People who don't have a PS3, even if the remasters end up being shitty, they're gonna be there on Switch and PS4, right? People will have no excuse anymore. So it's a good thing, but it's just I would prefer Namco bringing back the old Tales games, or the ones that never came out of Japan, instead of remastering the popular titles. You know, they always play it safe, those guys, and they don't play it safe correctly. But yeah, I don't think the rumor is true, but if it's true, then we'll see what happens. Will I buy them? I don't think so. Where's your favorite protagonist motivation? Or does the answer change if you're writing the character yourself as the author versus as part of the audience? I've always said this, you know, that when I write books, things like the motivation come during the writing. Like most of the characters, not all of them, there's been characters where since the beginning I was gonna be like Orion from the Revenant Army. I kind of developed the character before writing the book. I was like, I'm gonna write a story about this character who, you know me, I hate the system. So I wanted a character like that to fight the system, but I also wanted the system not to be evil. Like if you read the Revenant Army, you know, there's no evil. The Empire, you know, the Russian Empire isn't really evil. They're just, you know, they have different perspectives on life and economy and governance, you know, but I wanted that, so I planned all of that before writing the book. But usually I develop a crap ton of ideas for the book before writing it, and things like motivation or development go along as I write them. So you could say that I'm improvising a lot when it comes to motivation, you know. Sometimes I come up with this plot twist like much later, you know, when I'm about to finish the book, I'm like, oh, maybe I should do this, and boom, it happens. You know, and the motivation of the character changes. Nyx Inferno is a good example of that, how what I wanted to do with that book was play around with perspectives, both as the author and as part of the audience, like you're asking, and then it just came to me naturally that the motivation of every character needed to change halfway through the book, You know, at the beginning, you're reading about Lucius, and he's concerned. Like he has these very mixed feelings about what Nyx is doing. Like, okay, you know, she's destroying humanity, but she's doing so indiscriminately. Like, shouldn't she discriminate and kill all the evil, maybe, or kill all the bad guys, or the politicians, you know, or the mafias, or whatever, you know? And instead, she's just killing everybody. Doesn't matter what. And Lucius is like, But then his motivations start changing, you know? So that's what I do. So my favorite protagonist motivation is the one that evolves. Like, I don't really like when the characters have the motivation since the beginning, the same one, and at the end it's just the same, because it's kind of generic, because that's not realistic. You know, people change, experiences and what we go through in life, both positively and negatively, affects us every single week, day of our lives, you know, month, year, you know, and we change perspectives because of that. And goals that we may have, or philosophies or beliefs or ideals that we may have had before, we no longer have them nowadays. Some of them we still do, we hold on to some beliefs or some ideals, but some of them changed and evolved with us, and that's what I like to write about sometimes. I like that. Those are my favorite types of protagonists. Or also, you know, leaving motivation aside, some of my all-time favorite protagonists are like characters that are like outside of the cliche. You know, like Velvet from Tales of Berseria. I mean, what other characters are like her? You know, in JRPGs, there's a crap ton of anime series and mangas and books and whatever with characters like Velvet, yeah. But in a Japanese role-playing game, that's a rarity. And that's why Velvet's so popular, because she's just different, unique. I mean, there's barely any characters like her, you know? So, as a result, and she also gets these, her motivations at the beginning differ a bit at the end, you know? Interesting question, man. Thanks for asking.